students, and welcome to AP Daily. My name is Matt Romano, and I'm coming to you from Atlanta, Georgia, Marist School. And today we're going to look at some multiple choice questions, really with an emphasis on Unit 4, the financial sector. As always is the case with these videos, you've got a PDF if you'd like to follow along, and by all means, pause the video, do the questions, and then we'll look at the answers together. So, without any hesitation, let's get started. First question. Assume that the economy is in equilibrium. If aggregate demand increases, nominal interest rates and bond prices will most likely change in which of the following ways? All right, we've got to make some connections here. We've got to find a way to connect the change in aggregate demand, nominal interest rates, and bond prices. This is how we define the problem. You've got a whole set of tools that you have established, and here we are in Unit 4, so you've got 4 units worth of tools that you have really acquired so that you can do this. You can make these connections, and you can solve these kinds of problems. And what we're looking for is that, again, causal relationship between nominal interest rates and bond prices that was initiated by a change in aggregate demand. So looking at our options, the two-column question, A says an increase in nominal interest rates, an increase in bond prices. B, increase in nominal interest rates, decrease in bond prices. C, increase in nominal interest rates, no change in bond prices. D, a decrease in nominal interest rates and an increase in bond prices. And finally, E, a decrease in nominal interest rates and a decrease in bond prices. Well, step one is saying, how do I get from a change in aggregate demand to a change in interest rates? And then I can go from interest rates to bond prices. So let's just evaluate aggregate demand first. Aggregate demand changes, draw your graph, draw EDAS, and think about what happens there. We have a rightward shift in aggregate demand. That's an increase. That's going to lead to price level and output increasing. Okay, I need to take that information and transfer that over to what I know about nominal interest rates. Little I is nominal interest rates. What tool do I have that can help me with that connection? It's the money market graph. You've got to use your money market graph. So if you're answering this question, jot down on a sheet of paper your money market graph and go ahead and just draw a graph. That's why we have it. Draw your graph of the money market. So here we have it. Here's your money market, your vertical money supply, your downward sloping money demand. Your nominal interest rate is at that intersection. With the increase in price level and output, our fundamentals tell us demand for money is going to increase. And because of that increase in demand for money, we're going to see an increase in the nominal interest rate. So store that away, take that knowledge and bring it back over here. We're going to have an increase in nominal interest rates. What I should also know is there's an inverse relationship between interest rates and the price of bonds, previously issued bonds. So if interest rates are going up, bond prices have to be going down. That leaves us with option B, increase in nominal interest rates and a decrease in bond prices. There are a lot of ways to approach this question. What I'm trying to show you here is just a way of emphasizing the causal relationships that we have between these various variables, various factors. All right, on to number 2. Assume that the reserve requirement is 20%. Okay, that should stand out for us. Here we have a question that starts off by telling us that we have a 20% reserve requirement. That in itself should be a red flag. We are dealing now with a limited reserve system. Not the U.S. right now. The U.S. has ample reserves. This is some other economy. And in this economy, there's a 20% reserve requirement. We're dealing with limited reserves. I should also see this as somewhat of a red flag. Maybe this is a money multiplier question. Maybe this is a money creation. I don't know what it's going to be, but maybe I need a T account to do it. Let's move on. If a bank initially has no excess reserves, okay, that's a T account reference too, and $10,000 cash is deposited in the bank, the maximum amount by which this bank may increase its loans is, now we need to look at the options. A, $2,000, B, $8,000, C, $10,000, D, $20,000, or E, $50,000. Okay, so what are they really asking me? They're asking me, in this bank that had initially no excess reserves, and someone deposits $10,000, how much of that $10,000 cash deposit can the bank lend? So they had zero to lend. How much can they lend now? Well, where does that money come from? If you're looking at a T account, where is the money that the bank can lend? That's excess reserves. So really what the question is asking me, define the question. What the question is asking me is calculate excess reserves. How much does the bank have in excess reserves as a result of the $10,000 deposit? Well, with a 20% reserve requirement, we know they have to keep $2,000 on reserve. That's required. That is the law. That is a regulation. Excess then would be anything above and beyond the $2,000 that they keep on reserve. That means they have $8,000 in excess reserves. That means they have $8,000 to lend. That means B is the correct answer. Work your way through it sequentially. Work your way through it methodically. Take the information they gave you, pull from the information you already know, and find your answer. With that in mind, question number 3. There's the T account for us. You knew it was coming. We're going to have a T account. So, table below shows the current entries in the T account of XYZ Bank. Tim purchases a bond issued by the central bank for $50,000 and pays for the bond by drawing on her company's account at XYZ Bank. All right, so she's pulling money out of the bank. Money is leaving the bank, and she's paying the central bank. So it's really leaving reserves, it's leaving money supply, it's leaving everything. It's gone. What What is the effect of Kim's purchase of the bond on the required and excess reserves of XYZ Bank and the total money supply? So now we're evaluating a T account. Now let's look at our options because we want to know ultimately where we're going. But before we even go there, let's acknowledge once again, because the T account has required reserves, there is a required reserve ratio, a non-zero required reserve ratio. We are once again dealing with a limited reserve system. We're not in the U.S. right now. We're somewhere else. We have limited reserves.
SJBC specializes in training that gets you career ready. Train to be an aircraft.
Our possible solutions are going to be 3 columns: required reserves, excess reserves, and money supply. A says increase required, decrease excess, decrease money supply. B, decrease required, decrease excess, decrease money supply. C, no change in required, decrease excess, no change in money supply. D, increase required, no change excess, increase money supply. Or E, decrease required, increase excess, increase money supply. Just saying that out loud, that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot to evaluate. Let's don't even bother with that yet. Let's have those options in mind, and let's work our way through a T account to see what happens to those 3 variables. So, T account, let's review what we're looking at. On a T account, the left-hand side, assets, that's what's owned by the bank. XYZ Bank owns these things, and they're trying to increase the value of these assets to create some owner's equity. On the right-hand side are liabilities. Those are owed to someone else. As a reminder, and if you're not familiar with it yet, always keep the word ALLO in mind when you're working with T accounts. This identity will help you. ALLO means assets equal liabilities plus owner's equity. These 2 sides have to be equal. So whenever there's a change on one side, it's got to be countered by a change on the other side. Our reserve requirement comes out to 20%. They didn't tell us that, but they told us that because they put the $80,000 in required reserves on the T account, and that $80,000 is 20% of their $400,000 in checkable deposits. Now, here's our table. Here's the situation at hand. Kim took $50,000 out. That money initially comes out on our liability side. Okay, so that $50,000 we're going to see first reduce checkable deposits by $50,000 down to $350,000. But as we said, ALLO applies. There's got to be $50,000 decrease on the asset side as well. So where does that money come from? Initially, when they give Kim her $50,000 back, they are pulling that $50,000 out of bank reserves because they've got to keep the 2 sides equal. So that $50,000 out of reserves reduces total reserves to $50,000. That move is going to reduce required reserves to 50 and excess reserves to 0 because the first thing to go will be the excess reserves. So they take that $20,000, give it to Kim, then they take another $30,000 out of required, give that to Kim, so she has the $50,000 out of her deposits. That change is going to bring the total assets down to $350,000. Now, before we move on, we pretty much have our answer now. We pretty much have figured out our answer, but before we move to that, we do need to address one other thing. The bank has a problem. This isn't part of this question, but if it were extended a little further, maybe in an FRQ, the bank has a problem because the bank right now can't meet their reserve requirement. $50,000 is not 20% of $350,000. So if this were an extended problem, and we need to talk about it in a little more detail, we would have to see the bank do something to make sure their required reserves met the reserve requirement of 20%. They could call in loans. They've got $300,000 in loans. Or they could borrow money from another bank. They could borrow money from the central bank. But they're going to have to do something in this case because their required reserves have to equal 20% of checkable deposits. Now, that said, that wasn't part of this question, but we need to acknowledge it. This question was asking what happens to required reserves, what happens to excess reserves, what happens to money supply. By working our way through the T account, the answer should be obvious. We've had a decrease in required reserves. We've had a decrease in excess reserves. Because that money left, it went to the central bank, we also had a decrease in money supply. So go back to your options. We're looking for decrease, 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 and we find that at option B. So the correct answer, option B. All 3 of these are going to decrease when Kim takes that $50,000 out of her checkable deposits. Question number 4. If a banking system has ample reserves, okay, we need to know that, ample reserves, which of the following is an action taken by the central bank that would cause a decrease in the cyclical rate of unemployment in the short run? So I circled it because we have to know this, ample reserves. We're looking for a monetary policy under ample reserves. We want to see a monetary policy that will decrease the cyclical rate of unemployment in the short run. So here's another abbreviation I think will help you. Anytime you see ample reserves and the question is about monetary policy, think AIR, A-I-R. A-I-R stands for administered interest rates. Those would be the, let's just say, preferred monetary policy tools when you're dealing with an ample reserve system. And in the case of an ample reserve system in this situation, they have 2 options, obviously. In an expansionary monetary policy, they would lower administered interest rates, that being the discount rate, that being interest on reserve balances. Or in a contractionary policy, they would raise them. We are looking for expansionary monetary policy. We're looking for an example that decreases administered interest rates. So let's look at our options here. First of all, when you read through these, I'm going to start at the bottom. A decrease in personal income tax rates. That's not even monetary policy. That's a fiscal policy. We can't confuse those two things. Scratch E. That's not your answer. Get rid of it. Okay. Now, we're down to A through D. Increase in the required reserve ratio. Increase in the required reserve ratio. Not going to do it. In fact, in an ample reserve system, we have a 0 required reserve ratio anyway. If you were to increase it, which they wouldn't, but if they were, that would be a contractionary policy. An increase in the policy rate. The policy rate is not an administered interest rate, and an increase in that rate would actually increase cyclical unemployment. An increase in the discount rate. Well, the discount rate is an administered interest rate. However, increasing the discount rate is going to increase unemployment. D says a decrease in interest on reserves. Absolutely. Interest on reserve balances, that is an administered interest rate. And if you decrease those, then you're going to see a decrease in the cyclical rate of unemployment because of the increase in interest-sensitive spending, increase in aggregate demand, increase in output. So our answer is D. Question 5. If investors feel that business conditions will deteriorate in the future, the demand for loans and real interest rate in the local funds market will change in which of the following ways in the short run? Business conditions will deteriorate. We've got to connect that to either supply or demand in the local funds market. And the question is even saying demand for loans. That's a pretty big hint, isn't it? So we've got to say what's going to happen to demand for loans and what's going to happen to the real interest rate using our loanable funds market. Here are your options. Again, another 2-column question. A says an increase in demand and an increase in real interest rate. B, an increase in demand, a decrease in real interest rate. C, a decrease in demand, an increase in real interest rate. D, a decrease in demand and a decrease in real interest rate. And E, a decrease in demand and no change in the real interest rate. Well, for me, the first step in any of these types of questions is to draw the graph. You don't have to think through it. Yeah, investor feelings, business conditions, it's all great. Let's just draw the graph and see what happens. Take the knowledge that you have in this question and apply it. So, I'm going to draw this off to the side. Here's my loanable funds market, real interest rates versus quantity of loanable funds. I have my equilibrium set up. What's happening in this question? Investors feel business conditions will deteriorate. Things are getting worse. If things are getting worse, that's not a good time to invest. That's not a good time to go build a new factory, to go build new capital. As a result, it's also not a good time to go borrow money. So with less investment, less borrowing, we're going to see demand shift left. That's a decrease in demand. And with that decrease in demand, we're going to see real interest rates fall, and that's going to answer our question for us. So, from these 5 options, we're looking for decreased demand, decreased real interest rates. Option D, draw a graph. These are tools that we can use to help us answer problems. All right, that does it for Unit 4 Multiple Choice. I want to thank you for watching today. I want to encourage you to watch subsequent videos. And always keep in mind as you do, a problem well defined is half solved.